Good afternoon. Those outside, please come in if you want to be part of this. We don't have a lot of time. I think this year we only have a 20-minute slot, so I'm going to try and talk fast. We want to encourage anybody who wants to come speak to us afterwards. We're at the EXAH stand. My name is Tiaan le Roux. I'm the chief architect at EXAH and also the practice architect. I feel very privileged today to see so many of the clients we know, some of the people we're in the trenches with. And a lot of today's talk is actually around that, this constant drive, especially in the enterprise clients, around trying to find Salesforce talent inside, thinking that it's this panacea that ultimately would make these projects successful. So the argument we want to give today, from especially being in the front line so much, is that the majority of us as a partner's success lies deeply within the alignment of the client. But you can only align where you know where you want to go in this case. So what we say is, how hard could a Salesforce implementation be? And there's immediately sniggers for those who have done it before. How big is this mountain we have to climb? Because we want to talk about this imagery where Salesforce say we're all mountaineers. How big is this mountain? How many people have to climb it? Is it something you can just do with a partner, for example? And what are the drivers of complexity? So when we say welcome, I don't know how many people here are current customers or potential customers, but essentially what this is going to mean is you are a mountaineer. But if you look up into the mountain, it can be quite intimidating, especially when you start realizing how big these mountains get. So what we're saying is you think whatever you were sold in terms of Salesforce, because it is so rich. I can actually go to the next one. Because of the richness of Salesforce, because of all of these pieces playing together, just like chess, that every piece influences every other piece, all of this means that complexity means that you didn't buy some small hill, you bought Everest. You did buy Everest. Now, this is the key. Whether you climb all the way to the top or not, you've bought Everest at this stage. So what we want to understand is, how do we do this? If we know this, if we acknowledge this, what do we do under those circumstances? And why we're saying this is Everest, this is just for those who know it well. This is an ERD of Health Cloud, for example. This is what the inside looks like, which probably half of the room have seen before. If you look into the detail, you don't even have to read there. The fact is that you've got different fields that are connected to different objects. It is complex. But the key around the complexity is, in the absence, for example, of proper integration, how on earth will these ever get populated? Do people think that a human will type in every single piece? Everything needs to be connected to everything else. And what we then say is, if you're going to climb it that way, how high is the thing that you're trying to solve? Is often the question that we ask. And we always say that that failure to admit reality at any term, software doesn't care about your feelings. It either works or it doesn't work. The better you align with the reality in this sense, the bigger difference it makes. So if we simplify this, just because it's hard drawing diagrams on an actual mountain, we say that from all of the analysis we've done, this is a very important picture, and that's why I simplified it so much. The trick is, for those who know that, the simpler the text, the easier to remember. Fancy graphics actually move you away from that. So we're saying that if you look at this mountain, it's actually built from certain stages that built on top of each other. And this is very key. Because this is often what's neglected, is everybody thinks about pump in Salesforce resources, I need to train everybody up. We are arguing that only those two blue ones actually can be executed by Salesforce and by Salesforce resources. Everything else is the foundations that you build on. So when we speak about an aligned knowledge base, we speak about breaking a project apart, understanding why are we doing this. To have methods of actually saying, that a software on its own has no value. It has to align with what the business wants to achieve. How did I get my ducks in a row before we got started, for example? Before we moved to information logistics, which is the simple concept of what we call Shannon's law losses, that certain types of information transfer has losses. I can write you a sentence that took me a certain time to write. If I make it a paragraph or a page, it takes longer, but it doesn't necessarily communicate as much as just a simple conversation does. So when we find means of escalation through our information logistics that give you lean information rather than the full spectrum, you'll see that the foundation actually starts falling apart. After that is fit for purpose integration, which we can go to again, is to say, this system is never in isolation. It's trying to fulfill something within your whole spectrum. And even there, this is the first time that the partner really starts playing a game, but it's a massive part where your people inside the organization need to be unlocked to try and make more of this make sense. Declarative development, again, the wonderful parts of Salesforce where you don't have to code everything. But again, if you start this stuff on a weak foundation, you don't stand a chance. There's a really big indication there. Same with the specialized development. You want to go for that after you've proven that it can't work there. And then that much neglected piece, which is change management. Everybody budgets all the way to going live without understanding the incredible effort. The higher you move up to actually go through those. And we like to actually play around with symptoms to demonstrate this. So symptoms are very, very key to say, why is this such a big thing? So if any of you have seen POCs, it look like they just never get there. They go on and on and on and on, and they never get there. Our argument is what's sometimes scary is somebody wants to do a POC because he wants something fancy. He wants something that is actually quite high, that communicates with clients directly, but for a narrow piece. And what he's neglecting at that stage is that's about a 6,000 meter thing that you want to achieve. If you don't build the foundation, you build this tiny little tower that will eventually fall under its own weight. And the problem that we often see when execs say, I don't see any movement, is he's not here with you. You're a mountaineer right here. You can see movement. You know how hard you have to move every piece. But he's got his whole view on this piece that he wants to see because this isn't sexy. But it is one of those core elements that when we start working together and communicating and sharing this truth, it makes a big difference. Another common symptom is scope creep. Why would we ever have scope creep? Why would you suddenly, while you're working, see, but this just keeps getting wider and wider? Generally, what we're seeing is you inverted the mountain. You started with a narrow base, a few basic stories, and then every poor layer building on top of that have to fix it. So these poor developers have to try and build foundations so that this whole mountain doesn't actually fall over. So even scope creep for us as a symptom is an indication that something on there means that your foundations were wrong. So many more, and that's kind of what we're saying. There's not enough time for these. When you fail to decommission existing system, often means because you didn't truly understand what its role was inside the business. You didn't plan through the implications. It's something, it is actually the third last point, which is one I'd like to dwell on. It's called the happiness conspiracy, because everybody's at fault. It starts with the guys on the ground trying to look good to management and not tell them what they don't want to know. There is this certain implication around you saying that it will be done in a certain date because of an external-driven timeline. To say, for example, we have to renew our license in 8 months. I have to build this whole mountain within 8 months without acknowledging that. And anything that looks like bad news is just swept under the carpet. What we're saying is this is a lot like a pregnancy. I can't make a pregnancy better by adding 5 women to make it 3 months. It takes the time it takes. You have to go through the phases of what these things take in order to make them successful. Narrow tickets for me is a terrible thing. This is where I feel so sorry for developers. And this is one of our largest drivers. If you're up here and you receive a ticket to say, as a user, build me this. What often happened was the person who wrote that ticket actually already made decisions upstream. And we're saying that that's not allowed to happen either side. It's equally guilty when somebody says, but there's this holy cow system, nobody removes SAP. SAP must forever be part of the picture. Then you kind of start reining in what you want people to do in terms of their knowledge base because they don't want to fit that reality. Neither one are truly allowed to influence each other. What you want to try and do is do spirals that help you make commitments deeper and deeper. A development death march is probably the worst. It's where we're feeling that nobody truly has energy anymore. There's this saying that the opposite of love isn't hate, but indifference. When everybody just starts, they just arrive and they want to do it, you have to try and spot those spirals very quickly and try and interrupt them. When we see duplication of work, we walk into one org and we open the account object and there were 13 country fields. Like, why? And it's purely because the teams who were working did not have a unified way of breaking these stories apart and moving them closer. A very common thing is unwillingness to unlock additional investment, to say it's already not working, especially after a POC that failed. Trying to convince the org at that stage to say, no, but you need to invest more for the base is often very, very difficult. And I think from these, Outsourcing that doesn't produce results. And again, it's the exact same thing. If you have not sorted out these foundations and you get some hotshot outsourced company, they don't stand a chance. They don't stand a chance because it doesn't sync with where the company wants to go. So as we're saying, where do we go with this? Like, where do we insert energy that makes this work ultimately? And we're saying that you don't hit it by accident. This needs to be planned. It needs to be acknowledged. And the biggest thing that we've seen that makes a big difference is how do you approach a story? This is very, very key because a story should be as wide as possible. If I pose a certain story to somebody to say that if we start building our stories differently, start with the business, what we call level 1 stories. Break your business apart into its 9 or 10 pieces. Stop with each piece and discuss only with them. What are the main parts that exist for you within your part of your business? So it might be sales to say we have the marketing, then at this stage we have a certain pipeline and allocation, and these are our main elements. Don't just continue. Stop there and ask certain questions that help you clarify, such as, well, can you explain some of your current problems? Can you explain some of the dreams that you want to do? And you expose this to as many people as possible so that there starts being a map of answers and questions around every story. And immediately what happens, you have to have space for those answers to create their own new questions. If I'm a developer, by the time I get to level 3, 4, 5, where you're only supposed to start going as a user, I want to do this, I can go back all the way to seeing what was this full argument that allowed us, or allowed the decision to say that this needed to be built. So that's one thing that we're driving very heavily in our greenfields projects at this stage, is breaking apart problems within software that allows for us to do multiple mapping and paradigm shifts on a specific answer. And what's beautiful about it is by the time you get to level 3 and level 4, you can start answering questions around Salesforce. You can start answering to say, well, this will actually fit the account object. That will actually fit the opportunity object. And what you do when you've worked through all the stories is you look in the reverse and to say, show me all of the stories where account and contact was tagged. Now I can read it in context and not create duplication. So it is a massive thing about the methodology about how you break these apart. And for us, the big thing is that you really have to understand that this is a game of foundations, to say that whenever you skip any foundation, you pay a price. And what's key as well is when you start seeing this as the whole, you start creating cross-functional teams that says that the best way to do this is not finish this one and start with that one, is to acknowledge that each one informs the next one. So we often talk about incremental commitment spirals. We set up teams and streams to say that every stream, say for example, we spoke about sales, has a certain set of roles who have to play together all the way. You might have earmarked somebody that might eventually become your administrator, your sales cloud expert. You might have earmarked somebody that is most impacted by this sub-piece. You create these streams and you make them responsible for going through the phases of development in this one. As we said, that avoid Shannon's law losses. We say confusion is in the map and the territory. We try and acknowledge when somebody feels nervous. And often what we want to say is you're allowed to feel nervous, but then you have to give something back. Are you going to walk with us? Are you doing any of the things that we just said that you need to avoid doing? For example, are you going to avoid the happiness conspiracy? There is a certain effect that we see when every person who has a say on the project is actually on the mountain and isn't standing far away looking at the whole thing. Something changes, and we're seeing that even in our largest projects, that if you get certain involvement of managers, that's key. There's I don't know if the point is there, but it is actually a very important one. You have to learn to do more appraisal than measurement. The problem for us in reports is, again, it takes time that the whole expedition trying to walk up and build here has to stop to produce a report to let somebody know how it's going, rather than them appraising being part of the process. So there's ways that you can communicate between levels that also speeds up the project so you can ultimately hit critical mass. As we said, the incremental commitment spiral is absolutely such a beautiful thing, and it's one of those things we have to be careful about. If you enter a project with your licenses already defined, which is sometimes why we want to be involved in the earlier parts of the sales process, is why did you decide you needed 500 Sales Cloud licenses? What did you know when you made that decision? Because you make a decision that has an enormous impact up top. Can you defer that decision until you get your ducks in a row? And what we generally do is to say that that's not a one-way process. You feed us and we sit together and we understand what you want to do, and we educate you at the same time about how we've done it before. and what the software can do, which inevitably actually changes your story. When you've seen that, you suddenly say, but I would like that too. I'd like to change my story. You could never do that if it did the traditional path of the stories all have to be built. It becomes an exceptionally frustrating place, but when everybody works this way, nothing goes to waste. And this is such a key thing. When somebody says it's expensive, I want to say, but what would be the effect on your business if this works? Can you work that out? Do you understand everything it does? That's the thing that should be the cost driver. The only reason for you to be concerned about cost is if you believe that paying that cost will not get you there. That's a different problem at all. Always build from the bottom to the top. And it is one of those processes where you have to have knowledge about the top to do the bottom. But you're also not allowed to rein in people's ambitions from the business side because it might be technical. There's a point where when you see the problems together, you find a solution that often you can't find it by looking at just one. If you take a step back and see it as a map of problems, you are able to actually get there. We love to embrace the skunkworks concept rather than the POC concept. It's a discussion we just had last week with apps on some of the other clients. There is such a key difference in a skunkworks project, which almost requires a bit of trust from the partners, from IT, and from business to say that skunkworks does not and should not have the same burden as a POC. In other words, we want to set out to learn something about whether something is possible inside Salesforce. We are willing to have that answer be no, and we're willing to, whatever we build, be throwaway afterwards or have to be rebuilt again. There's the saying that you never want the first version of software, you always want the second version of software. So how do you do that? Bring the first version forward a lot. So what we try and do is we bring clients in during the whole process of how would we think about this problem, how do we make it lean so that we just have the right guys in the room who nod at each other to say, this makes sense, let's keep building. And those small spirals means that you can sometimes, within a month or two, prove key things across the whole chain that allows for the whole team to start lifting. The main thing we've seen, especially in the enterprise projects, you will never be able to execute this successfully if you start from this has to be done before that's done in full. You need parallel movement everywhere. Embrace things like data dictionary, where you say that why aren't we starting now? Move on everything that you know would be valuable later and understand the list of things that would be valuable later. And then again, I see we're out of time. Just come speak to us. We are at our stall. Come hear how we do this. Come here and we can understand where you are on your Salesforce journey. This is one of those things that we want this to be right because it allows us to build better software. And in this case, the main argument was understanding that you play a much larger role in a successful project. That we've sometimes seen that when you do this well, you can actually choose any partner after that. And you want to get a partner that helps you through the whole chain, not just one piece. Thank you.